Well, I'm here today with Mary Harwick. I'm just so grateful, Mary, that we can have this discussion because your life is fascinating.
Oh, thank you.
I've known you long enough to know that you are the busiest woman I think that I know. And I'm just so grateful. So we've been calling these podcasts Generations of Faith because your perspective on life and how Jesus has been part of your life is so invaluable for us to be encouraged by and to share. So I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much.
I'm happy to do it. And I have to say that I guess faith has been my foundation almost as long as I can remember. There's even a story in our family that when I was 2.5, I was supposed to sing Jesus Loves Me, and my sister was going to play the piano. So everyone came to this little country church that I was baptized in, and I bucked. I wouldn't sing. So the next year, I sang Jesus Wants Me for a Sunbeam. And when I came to Mount Lebanon Church to join the church, Jack Clinton said, he asked me what my early memory was, and I said about singing that, and he said, "Oh, I love that song. Can you still sing it?" So I sang it, and I got into church, so I guess I passed that. But we lived on a farm. I was born on the farm, as my sister was, born at home. And for $20, the doctor came and delivered me and left the nurse there for a week. And I had an older brother and an older sister. And we went to a little church called the Concord Presbyterian Church. And it's actually right across from the cemetery where my great-grandparents are buried, my grandparents are buried, my parents are buried, my daughter is buried, and I'll be buried there when that time comes. So that's the Concord Presbyterian Church. And so that church was a foundation for me when I was very little. And then we moved to Brookville when my dad got a job with Manufacturers Light and Heat Gas Company. And in Emmerickville, which was a little tiny town, I don't really remember. I was about 4. And I don't remember much about church then, except going to oyster dinners and eating my dad's oyster crackers. I remember that vividly. But then we moved into Brookville, and that's when the Brookville Presbyterian Church really became the foundation. I mean, I was at church, sang in the choir, ran the nursery school. Dr. Ingersoll was the minister. And life kind of centered around the church. I sang in the choir, and I also sang in a girls' trio at the high school. So every Easter, they would invite us to sing at the Easter sunrise service. And at the last class reunion, which was our 65th, was the last one we had, the 3 of us remembered that one time at the Easter service, we got the giggles, and just one of those things where you just did not know what was. And we finally got ourselves pulled together enough to sing without disgracing ourselves. But no, church was very important to me all through school. And then when I went to Indiana to college, I attended the church there. And my husband and I actually eloped.
Oh,
When
you
I
did?
was when we were in college. I was a sophomore and he was a senior. And we eloped to Hagerstown, and I insisted I had to be married in the church. So we went to a Presbyterian church, and Reverend Butcher said he was glad we were getting married in the church. And so then when we lived in Indiana while he was still in school and I was still in school. And we went to the church there, Indiana Presbyterian Church.
What college was that?
It's called Indiana State Teachers College then.
Okay.
Then it later became IUP,
Oh.
Indiana University of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But yeah, we went to church there regularly. I taught Sunday school. I was assistant superintendent, and Bob would get it. My son Bob, who has belonged to the church almost as long as I have, because he was, when we moved to Mount Lebanon in '68, he and Barry both went into the communicants class. So he's only, I think, a year and a half behind me as far as how long, we've been in the church. But I still tease him that when he was 4 years old, he would go to Sunday school, of course, with us every Sunday. And he was at the cowboy hat, cowboy boots, and gun and holster.
Oh, fun.
Never without them. And so one morning we were getting ready for church, and he comes down with it on. I said, "You can't really wear that to church, Bob." And he said, "Why not? God doesn't care what you wear to church. He just wants you to come."
Oh, isn't
He
that
was 4
sweet?
years
He was
old.
only 4.
Yeah. We compromised. He took off the gun and holster, but wore the cowboy hat and boots.
That's really fun to know.
Yeah. But no, as I said, church has always been kind of the center of my life. And of course, when I came to Pittsburgh and we joined Mount Lebanon UP Church, a lot of the younger people in the church, I'm sure, don't realize how big our church used to be.
Oh.
It used to be, the church was so packed, they had to open up the sides, for people to sit.
Mm-hmm.
And my son Bob once teased me that I was just trying to get in my obituary that I had every spot in the church that I could have. Deacon, elder, trustee, Sunday school teacher, Sunday school superintendent, and the whole thing. But if you would ask me what my favorite thing had been at church, it was the joy of sharing Christmas.
Oh.
The joy of sharing Christmas was an outreach that has never been matched anywhere in Mount Lebanon. I don't know whether you, Cinda, ever even remember that or
Oh,
not?
I was part of it. I was one of the village shopkeepers.
Okay. Well, I was a storyteller every year. And it was so meaningful because I can still remember one year I was telling a story, and I said to them that on Christmas morning, I want you to go to the top of the steps or wherever you see the Christmas and say to yourself, I've already received the best gift in the world with Jesus. I wonder what else I got.
Oh.
And you know that I was in a grocery store after that, and this little kid waved to me and said, "Storyteller, storyteller."
Oh, how cute.
I did that. So, it's funny because I was the Jack in the Box, I was the Mother Goose, I was all these different characters. But it's amazing. I had kids who became adults and would say, "Are you still having that at church? Because I want to bring our kids back."
Mm-hmm.
So,
That was pretty powerful.
oh, it was.
I remember that buses used to come.
Oh,
Yeah, and bring people from schools and from retirement residences.
we brought Lydia's place.
Did you?
We brought the kids out every year,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd go up to Southminster, and they would have a luncheon. We'd go over to Mount Lebanon Library, and they'd tell a story, and then we'd come back to our church for the joy of sharing Christmas. It was, that's probably my favorite all-time thing at our church.
Mm-hmm. What about the other things you're involved with, like Lydia's Place? Can you talk to us a little bit about Lydia's Place?
Well, that's kind of interesting because back in 1988, Mary Bauer, who was a dear friend of mine, she and Ray, both at our church, someone stole her wallet. And she said she never knew why, but she was called to go down. When they called and said they had her wallet and they had arrested the girl, she said she felt just compelled to go down. Now, if you remember Mary Bauer, very blonde, very attractive woman, and Alexis, who was the one that stole her wallet, was African American, and her mother taught Bible studies at the church, at the jail. And so Mary went down and went to the visiting area, and they came in and said to Alexis, there's a lady out here to see you. And she said, I don't know who would be coming.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, it's the woman you stole her wallet. And she said, oh, I don't want to see her. And so Mary said she insisted on seeing her. And her mother, Alexis's mother, was there, Inez. And Alexis' mother and Mary became very close friends. And Mary decided to go in and join the Bible studies. And one morning in church, she was talking about it, and I leaned over and I said, that sounds really interesting. And she said, do you want to go in with me? And I said, yeah, I'd like to do that. Well, that was 1988.
1988.
And as I say, I haven't gotten out of jail since. But our church has been so wonderful in helping keep us in that church, in the jail. Because Larry Seelig and Bernie Johnson, Bernie was very instrumental in helping get Lydia's Place financially started. And then Larry, I was a deacon at the time, and I was teaching in the jail and doing everything else I was doing. And he said, well, you don't have to make home visitations. We're going to call your visits in the jail your home visitations.
Oh,
But
I
no, the
see.
church has been so supportive of the jail ministry, not only with Lydia's Place, but we're still going in to do Bible, or to do church services.
In the jail.
Mm-hmm.
We are.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we still have a team, as you know.
Yep, I was there last Thursday. As a matter of fact, I had to preach because Ken Flack, who usually does ours, couldn't be there, and Joyce had a story, said, I'm not preaching, and Pat Crosby said, well, I couldn't preach. I said, well, then I guess I will.
Was it just spur of the moment for you?
Yeah, it was, but I'd done it before, so I pulled out some stuff from past times, and went fine. So.
Are these men and women, or are they
Well, we were-
separated for the service?
Oh no, they're separated. This was all
Right.
men.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Well, as I said, we all say we get as much out of it or more than the people were. Because I still remember the first time I went into the jail, I remember the chaplain said this, don't ever say you're bringing God into the church, into the jail, because he's already there. You're bringing the word. And I always thought that was meaningful.
That is.
Because, God is in there, and you see him. I mean, he shines in there. I mean, I often said there's more talent in the jail, what I call wasted talent, because I used to tease the men that I was going to bring America's Got Talent in, and because they write their own music, then they sing it, and so it's I would say, other than my family, I always consider the jail ministry part of the church, but that's probably been one of the most meaningful things to me.
Well, what does Lydia's Place do?
Well, when Lydia's Place started, it was actually called Women's Christian Renewal, and it was really a group of African American women who were doing Bible studies and so on, but they'd never been able to get it together to get a non-profit status and so on. So when Mary and I joined, we brought another woman in, Sally Childs, who just a wonderful woman, very, I don't want to use the word, but they were very wealthy. But you'd never know it, because she went in and did Bible studies and everything. But we incorporated as Women's Christian Renewal with a project, Lydia's Place. And the idea at the time was that we hoped to work with the women in jail when they came out of jail, and eventually we wanted to have a place. And that's why we called it Lydia's Place.
I see.
Went to the seller of purple cloth, and she said to them, and when you are done, come to my house, come to my place. So we named it Lydia's Place. And for years, Lydia's Place, I always say, the project, the child outgrew the parent, and Lydia's Place became much larger. And we worked then with just women. We worked with the women. And when they moved into the new jail, Sally Childs and I went in and asked the project director, Andy Sackmar, if we could start parenting classes, because we saw that as one of the biggest needs. And he said if we designed it, we could have it. So I taught parenting classes for Lydia's Place for years. And we used to put on Christmas. They used to allow us to have Christmas parties for the women. As a matter of fact, one of the funny ones was when we were in the old jail, we actually took in Kentucky Fried Chicken and Pepsi for the party. And that was such a thrill for them. But what we had forgotten is that Kentucky Fried Chicken puts those little combination forks and spoons, which was a no-no. So we got through it. We had to count every single one of them before we could leave the jail, that they matched how many we brought. So that was the end of Kentucky Fried Chicken. But when we went to the new jail, they allowed us still to have the party. And we could bring Pepsi and cookies. And our church used to bake cookies by the hundreds to cover, because by that time there were, I think, about 175, 200 women. So we would have cookies and Pepsi for them. And we used to make stockings. I used to cut out stockings out of Christmas material, and then there were 3 or 4 women that sewed them. And we would put things in, and then they would use them to take their toiletries and so on. But then after a while, they didn't allow us to do that anymore, because that was bringing things in that that they were afraid somebody would bring in something that they weren't supposed to. So, but then what happened with Lydia's Place is the new chaplain at the jail, her name was Lynn Yesso, was so impressed with what was happening with the women that she decided to start a program for the men. And she called it HOPE, helping open people's eyes. And so for a while we had Hope for the men and Lydia's Place for the women. Then Lydia's Place, and I have to say this was a sad time, but when my daughter died, was killed in an accident in 2004, I had just left my position as president of the board. And for about a year I was doing lots of other things, and they decided to go a different direction. They decided they would go in with renewal for men, and they would only work with the women when they came out of jail. So, and meanwhile, inside the jail, Lynn Yesso had said, well, then would we consider becoming the women's part of HOPE? So then I switched over, to HOPE, and we kept that going. But Lydia's Place is still there.
Oh, it is.
But they are in the same building with Renewal, and they only work with the women when they come out of jail. So, but that's how that got started. And our church has been, I'll tell you, there's 2 things that our church has done that I consider one of their biggest contributions community-wise. One is to the jail. They've never lost that commitment. And the other is to the food bank. Because Karen Stewart, who's the director, would tell you that the food bank could not be operating if it were not for our church. Not just in the volunteers and the money and the things they bring in, but just the support.
The support.
And it's going to get a whole lot worse.
Because of the recent cuts in funding.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So that's another one of your passion, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
The Brookline Food Pantry.
Yeah. I still
So
do.
what's your role with that?
Well, I just help wherever I can.
You're there every Wednesday. I know every Wednesday
yeah.
that they...
Wednesday I'm the soup person. I collect the soup to put in the bags. Thursday I usually sort food, because that's when our church usually brings in their food. Then Saturday, my station is the baked goods.
Okay.
So, yeah, I've been working with that since, I guess 1993. Yeah.
So when you were employed, I think I know part of that, your history, but you started in education, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah. I have my bachelor's degree is in elementary, and my master's is in guidance and counseling. And I've been in about every phase. I started out as a junior, senior high school counselor down in West Green School District. And I was the only counselor for grades 7 through 12. It was a very busy time. And then we went to New York when John went to teach at St. Bonaventure. And then I went into Head Start. Oh. And I was in Head Start for 2 years, which was probably one of my favorite things ever. And I had an African-American director, Catherine Kenny. And she probably taught me more about working with disadvantaged children and parents. So after a year teaching, I became the homeschool liaison, and I went into the homes and took kids to the doctors and the dentists and all that. And then we moved to Pittsburgh when John came down to teach at Point Park College. And I was going to try to get into Head Start. Well, that was in 1960. No, 1968. I had to get my date straight there. And that's when they had all the race riots. And they wouldn't even interview me for a job. So I substituted in the city schools, and I ended up teaching kindergarten at John Morrow for 6 weeks over in the north side. Had 38 kindergarten kids. Oh. And one day the principal came in and said they are closing down another school, and you're getting 6 more. And I think back on it.
That's a lot of kindergartners, isn't it?
But it went fine. Then I went down to Banksville for the second semester, and I had 42 kids in my kindergarten there. Oh. But somehow it all worked out.
Wow.
Yeah. So then Keystone Oaks had gotten a grant to try elementary counseling. Keystone Oaks was the first school to have elementary counselors anywhere. And I was hired, and when I started, I had Hillsdale and Kelton, 800 kids.
Wow.
Yeah, and then the other 2 counselors had Castle Shannon and Green Tree. But after the years, the citizens voted to keep us. And so I loved my job there. I loved my job. It was fascinating. So
you retired from that position then?
Yeah, I was at Keystone Oaks 25 years. Then I retired. And then when I retired, I went with Parent and Child Guidance part-time, and they had a grant with the City of Pittsburgh schools. And I would go into a school for 6 weeks and do whatever they wanted me to do in the city school. So I was in almost every city school for a while, and that was a whole different ball game, but very rewarding too.
Well, you have a real heart for helping people, don't you?
Well, I guess I remember filling out. Larry Seelig was the first one that had that. What do you call it?
The spiritual gifts inventory.
Spiritual gifts. And that's what he said to me. He said, "There's no doubt of yours. Your spiritual gift is wanting to help and service." I remember as a little girl, and my sister doesn't remember either, but someone said to me once, and I never forgot it, says, "Only one life 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for God will last." And I remember that. I was just a little girl.
So is that kind of your life motto?
I think it became my life model. Yeah, motto.
And you're still doing it.
Well, I try.
Yes. I'd say that you outpace most people who are in generations far younger than your generation. But you do.
Well, and I think one thing I think is so important, and I'm glad you're doing this, is I think there's so much that's going to be lost. I was telling someone not too long ago, probably one of the periods of my life that I remember the most is my dad was drafted into the Army when he was 37. He was as old as you could be on the troop ship going across. And my brother was in high school, my sister was in middle school, and I was in elementary school. But those years I remember so vividly. And I just think there's so much of that's going to be lost if people, don't talk about it so that people remember.
Just the experiences that people went through and the kind of life that they led and maybe the kind of concerns that they had, because that certainly affected your life to have your father drafted.
Yeah, I still remember going to the movies, and they always had the newsreels, and I was sure I was going to see my dad. Of course, I never did. But no, I said, when I think back to those days, the only thing was nobody had much of anything. But I remember making butter with lard with a little yellow thing. We knead it so that it looked like butter, but it tasted like lard. And we collected scraps. We collected dimes to buy bonds. And I think one of my most vivid memories is in every window, if someone had someone in the service, there was a star in the window. If it became a gold star, then you knew they'd lost someone. But those years, I do think back on those, that I remember very vividly. We were renting a house, and the landlord decided to sell it. Now, that was actually illegal. You weren't really allowed to sell a house someone who was serving, but we didn't have money for an attorney. And I still remember my brother, who was a junior in high school, saving money for college, and he gave my mom, I think it was like $400, so that she could put a down payment on a little house across the street so we'd have a place, to live. But, but again, as I said, my memories back then are the church was always there. I mean, we went to what we called Christian Endeavor every Wednesday night, and Sunday, of course, was church. And so you always knew it was there. That wasn't going anywhere. The church was, even though you worried about your dad and everything else, the church became a place where you felt safe.
That's really a wonderful thing, isn't it? That's really such a great perspective. Do you think people still feel that way about the church?
I think there's a lot of changes, and they're not all good. I was telling you about this book that I read. In that they were asking what I thought the biggest change in my lifetime was. I said communication, because I think that while I enjoy my cell phone, I enjoy getting pictures from my great-grandkids, I think the detriment came with people have lost the ability to communicate face-to-face. I remember when I was counseling, 4th grade girls were very difficult. They were yeah. She said, then he said, then she said, then she said. But I used to say to them, never say anything. Never write or call or write anything that you would not say to the person. And I said, when I think now of the suicidal rate that has gone up because of the horrible, cruel things that are said, that I think back to that, that I think there needs to be more face-to-face communication. And I think even within the church, I think there's not as much maybe communication as there should be.
Because you think that people's relationships are kinder and stronger by face-to-face interaction?
Oh, I think so, yeah. And I think all you have to do is go by a bus stop in the morning. It used to be kids would be clowning around and talking, and now they're all standing there with their phones.
Oh.
And you go out to dinner and you see a whole family, and every single one of them has their phone. Now, do they go home and say, oh, we had a wonderful family dinner? Did you even talk to each other? So I would say I think our church tries harder than a lot of churches because of small groups and that type of thing. But I think in general, communication is not a lost art, but it's something that I think if we could come back and talk to each other, and I think too that the society we're living in right now makes it even harder because it's so divided that sometimes people won't even talk because if they say the wrong thing or somebody else says something, then they've lost that ability to be able to communicate too.
So if you were to tell somebody why the church has been your rock, what would you say? How is it your rock? Like, how would you explain your faith to somebody else? Like
Well,
what Jesus means to you? And
I guess when I think about that, I think when my daughter died, I thought, how does anyone who doesn't have faith get through this? So I don't know whether I'd even say the church itself is my rock, as I would say Jesus and believing in God is my rock. Because I have to say, there are often things in church that I don't agree with that I would change if I knew how to do it. I think that's true in all churches. I think churches are having a struggle right now because I think a lot of people have turned away from God. I can remember people saying, I'm going to put the fear of God in you. Well, if you don't fear God, then what's that mean?
that didn't mean anything, did it?
Doesn't mean anything. But I think there has to be not only the love, but I think there has to be a little bit of fear.
Like,
that, in the afterlife, have I, and I this may sound silly, but I've gotten a lot of awards and everything for things that I've done. And I remember one time someone said something about, winning this or winning that. And I said, I don't want that because I said, the Bible says if you stand on the street corner and, you get all this, that's your reward. Well, I don't want that reward. I want the one that's coming next. And I think that's one thing I think about the church. I think you have to constantly remember that your faith and your hope is in God, not whether you like the way the church program is going or whether you like the worship as traditional or contemporary. It's, how do you see God in your life?
yes, we all want, you said that so well. You really did. And I know that one thing that we all are trying to do is to find ways to introduce people who have been separated from God for one reason or another, maybe just their upbringing or just haven't been around, to try to make a welcoming place for people to safely explore who God is, and what their relationship to Him can be.
One of my favorite things at the church now is the mustard seed luncheon.
Is it really?
I love the mustard seed luncheon because I think that's one place where you have people there and they can express and I'm not saying this, you do such a good job in pulling us all together, and I think that's a wonderful. I'm so glad you started that. I really like that.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. It's one of my highlights. I love it. It's fun. We've become a nice little family, haven't we? Yeah. Well, that's good. But we do, faith is really important, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So in this book that you put together, did you find anything surprising about looking back at things that you've accomplished in your life that were fun to share?
No, I look at it and I sometimes say, I wonder how I did that. I have a picture here. This was a picture of when I graduated from college. I had 3 kids.
Oh, look at that.
They were 1, 2, and 3.
Oh my
And then I
gosh,
went
Mary.
on, and we went straight into our master's program. And we were the first husband and wife to get our degree. And we were infamous because they put us on the newspaper picked it up because Governor Lawrence and Dr. Pratt from the college gave us our diplomas, and all three of our kids were there. So it went all over the United States. So, but I think back to, I think one of the things you do is you take day by day. I think people that try to plan, there's an old saying, something about that, you plan, then God
God has other plans,
yeah,
right?
God may not have the same plans for you. But I think in going through this, it made me thankful for the wonderful childhood I had. I lived on a farm, and then I lived in a small town where everything was, nice. And I look back and I think I felt very fortunate. When I finished, I just felt very fortunate looking back on my life, because it could have gone very much the other way. Eloping at the age of 19, and I was a sophomore in college, and we got married. We eloped at the beginning of March, and I was still a cheerleader at IUP, and when I got pregnant in the fall, and the doctor told me I couldn't cheerlead anymore unless I couldn't do any of the stuff. And I think, I just think of how people helped me. It was like people were determined that even though I had been somewhat of an idiot to elope, my cheerleading friends and my sorority babysat so I could go to, get the classes. They'd hand me the baby and I'd go into the next class. And, I think back to how much help I had, that I never could have done it if I hadn't had a lot of people that seemed to be determined to save me from myself and get me through school. Because back in those days, number one, you couldn't be married and live in a college. You definitely could not be pregnant. And I was doing my student teaching, and I remember my husband's grandmother made me 3 skirts that had elastic so that I could get through without, and I know she told me later, my critic teacher knew I was pregnant but didn't say anything. So I got through that. So, I just think sometimes life it's wonderful because everything is sometimes so unexpected. You don't know what's going to happen next, and you have to go with the flow. And that's why I think it's so important to have that foundation that you can always fall back on with Christ as the center of your life, because everything else in life is transient. It goes, and it doesn't always go the way you wanted it to. There are ups and downs.
There's that verse in the Bible that says Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow.
Right.
So we can count on him to be the constant.
Right.
This has been so fascinating. Your life is fascinating. You are a very strong person and very determined, I think, too.
Well,
I mean, to get through college with 3 young children, 3, 2, and 1, that's incredible to graduate with that. That's amazing.
well, as I said, you just take it a day at a time. Yeah. But no, I said I feel like I've been very fortunate. I'd say there's 2 things that probably rocked me most. One was the death of my daughter, and the other was our divorce. Because I'd never thought, I thought when you get married, you're married for life. But even that, I don't, that was the way it was supposed to be, I guess. And we were good friends up until he died. I visited him every day.
That really struck me that you stayed friends, because I knew you, and when you were going to, I think I saw you at cross-country meets together.
Oh, yeah.
And I was very struck that you were friends.
Yeah. We were on the board of directors West Penn Track Club, and his friend at the time was also on the board.
Is that right? That
She
had to
got-
be interesting.
Yeah, she got such a kick out because, I'd say, well, we're not going to do that. And John would say, well, we should do this. So we would get, even with the track club. I mean, he helped me with Lydia's place. I helped him at track meets. And so it all worked out. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Mary, for this. Thanks for the time that you took to tell us about your faith journey. And I am inspired just listening to you. So I know that
Well,
other people will be very encouraged by you.
I appreciate that very much. Thank
And
you.
I'm just, when you talk to me about how you're appreciative of other people helping you, I think you've done the same for so many people. You've stepped in and helped them no matter what it was that got them in their circumstances. You've helped them.
Well, I think that's one of our purposes in life, really, is to help each other. And sometimes, my son put it very well. When I had the 4 pelvic fractures and I was totally dependent on someone, and I kept saying, oh, I hate to ask you. And I still remember he said to me, Mom, it's the circle of life. He said, there are times when you can help other people, but you have to be willing to accept help when you need it. And I thought, he's absolutely right, that it has to be a two-way street.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Mary.
You're welcome.
This has been a blessing. Thank you.